In this part of John, the first chapters of John, we see a series of conversations that Jesus has with someone else. So this is the next in a series of conversations. And Dr. Birch, Dr. Gary Birch, one of my favorite scholars, says that this is a story that amuses as much as it surprises. I think you'll see that as we go through this story. Because the conversation with the Samaritan woman that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman, and one with a questionable background to boot. Jesus is a single Orthodox Jewish male and a rabbi, no less. There is no way on earth this man should be sitting talking with that woman, but he does. And that's part of what makes it so intriguing. I'll talk about that as we go through this. And then we also see irony in this story. Do you understand this word irony? It's something unexpected. And there's a lot of unexpected things. I've already said a couple of them, right, in this story. And then we can see the difference between this woman and Nicodemus, because while Nicodemus, a religious scholar, apparently fell silent and did not respond to Jesus' teaching and admonition. Here, this irreligious outcast winds up acknowledging Jesus as the Savior of the world. Now, I believe that Nicodemus came to know Jesus, but it wasn't apparent in that conversation. And then further, this woman at the well did what Andrew did in chapter 2. He went out immediately to tell others about Jesus and bring them to Jesus. So she brought the Samaritans to Jesus. And Andrew was one of the 12 disciples. This is an outcast, not one of the chosen disciples. So I want to remind you where we've been talking about, because it's been a long time, about this theme of replacement in John, especially in the first chapters of John. And so we saw in John 2 the wedding at Cana, and the purification rites, right? Like the jars with the water that they dip their hands in to be ceremonially clean, and so that has something to do with replacement, because Jesus is replacing those jars. No longer do you have to dip your hands in to be all right with God. Jesus has done that for us. And then also in chapter 2, I'm pretty sure, the cleansing of the temple. And Jesus is the replacement for the temple. In fact, there is no temple anymore. But the temple was the place where sinful human beings met with God. And now Jesus is the place where sinful human beings meet with God for forgiveness. And then represented by Nicodemus in chapter 3, we see that Jesus is the replacement for the teaching of the rabbis. His word is to be trusted. And then also in chapter 3, we see that he is the replacement of the ministry of John the Baptist. In chapter 3, we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but in chapter 3 of John, John the Baptist is imprisoned, and it will lead to his death. So he never gets out of prison again. So now Jesus is going to, with this story, to show this woman that his gift of salvation surpasses any gift that Jacob's well can give. Jacob's well is no match for Jesus as well. So we're going to start with the first 4 verses. I have that up there. There you go. Blanks. Hard to see.
No, I just looked back.
So now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So Samaria was in between. This probably works better. This next one. So Samaria was right in between Judea and Galilee, in the north. So I don't see it very clearly from here, but about where that Israel is about where it is where the Samaria was. So he's leaving Judea, and he's leaving because the Pharisees have begun to take notice of his ministry, not in a favorable way. So he probably didn't want to cause a further rift between himself and the disciples of John, who were very upset, obviously, that their teacher had been imprisoned. But more importantly, Jesus had reason to fear that he would be arrested, and it wasn't time yet. His time had not yet come, and his aura, right, the hora, had not yet come. So I'm going to give you a little background. We talked about this with the other lecture, but I think this one is more succinct, and I think it's you'll have these notes to work off of. So at some point in the life of Israel, the kingdoms split. It was one kingdom, and it split Israel to the north and Judah to the south. The northern kingdom of Israel fell to Assyria in 722 BC. And when that happened, they took captive and those who were of any substance. If they were wealthy, if they were leaders, the common people they let stay. But anyone, and they might have taken some of the common people too, but they definitely took the people who were of substance, of money and rulers and those people. So those who were exiled, those who were left behind intermingled both in marriage, and sometimes maybe not in marriage, but still intermingled, and religion. So those who were exiled returned to find a spiritual hodgepodge in Israel, part Jewish, part pagan. And over time, the Samaritans gravitated to a monotheistic religion, one God, but one with some real holes in its theology. Some things were missing, and some things were added. So let's talk about a few of those beliefs. They said they only believed in the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And here's why they only believed in the Pentateuch. They didn't believe the rest of what we call the Old Testament. So they only believed in the Pentateuch because much of the rest was written. Most of the rest of the Old Testament, I should say, emphasized Judea and David rather than Samaria and Abraham. The Pentateuch is all about Abraham and his progeny, his children and grandchildren and all that. So they also worshipped on Mount Gerizim, and they had a temple there, a separate temple there. And the reason they built their temple there was because that was the place where that was the mountain where Abraham first worshipped in the promised land. So again, they revered Abraham. And they worshipped, and their temple, as I said, was on Mount Gerizim. So the place, so we already did that. So there grew up a bitter rivalry between the Jews and the Samaritans. They had contempt for each other, and it just grew over time. In fact, in 128 BC, the Jews burned down and destroyed the Samaritan temple. And they were they obviously that angered the Samaritans. Sorry, I'm trying to read. So yeah, it was a bitter rivalry. And in Jesus' day, Gary Birch calls it a smoldering tension. Think the modern Arabs and Israelis with a little less violence. How shocking would it be today, if you know anything about the Jews and the Arabs? How shocking would it be today for a Jew to strike up a polite conversation with an Arab within Palestinian borders? That doesn't happen. And the last year has been some of the worst fighting between them in decades. I remember going to hear. I'm going to have to give you some background because you're young. You don't remember this. Anybody heard the name Henry Kissinger? You will when you get to American history. Henry Kissinger was a very famous man. He was Secretary of State for Nixon. He was born in Israel, but he became an American citizen, and he was very famous and very brilliant. And he came to Omaha to speak. And so my mother and I went to Joslin Museum and heard him speak. And I've never forgotten, he had this very low voice and accent, and he had an accent. And I'll never forget the first thing he said. He came out, and the first thing he said was, "Everybody asks me, when will there be peace in the Middle East? As if there has ever been peace in the Middle East." And it's true. That place has been aflame since before Abraham's time. So it was happening in Jesus' time as well. And it is into this very cauldron that Jesus steps to talk to this woman that all of his people would have hated. So let's talk about the well a little bit. We're going to read verses 5 and 6. So Jesus, came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, weary as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, so noon-ish. Here's some interesting tidbits about the well. First of all, we know the exact location of the well. And it's very near Joseph's grave on land that was settled by Jacob, also called Israel, in Shechem. Also, yeah, you can go to Joseph's grave as well when we take our trip. And it was dug. It was a dug well. That's called a cistern. So it wasn't a natural well, but it was fed by an underground spring. So Jesus sits down at the well because he's tired, uh, and yeah, that's interesting in a gospel that has a very high Christology, a very high view of Jesus, and is very concerned with recognizing his messiahship, but and as well as his divinity. But this would be that this would be mentioned. But we have to remember that Jesus was fully human as well as fully divine. So he was tired and apparently thirsty. And it was about noon. So that was an odd time. And it's odd that she would be there alone. Because what the women would do was they would go first thing in the morning to the well to get their water before it got hot. And they would go there as a group because that's what women do. Men don't do that. I'll give you an example. When you're out with a group of people and one girl wants to go to the bathroom, she'll either ask if anyone wants to go or others will say, I'll go with you. I have never heard a man say to another man, would you like to go to the bathroom? I'm going to the bathroom, you want to come? That doesn't happen, right? So these women were women. They came to the well en masse, and it was probably a very social time, and a lot of gossip was going around. The woman was not there in the morning. She waited till the middle of the day. Why?
She didn't want to be with God.
Yeah, she was an outcast of outcasts. The Samaritans were outcasts, but she was even an outcast with her own people. And so she wanted to be alone. And she thought she would be alone. But she is utterly surprised when she finds Jesus there. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Where it says well, let me do this first. I'll get to that. Not just that he asked her for a drink. She's not surprised just because he asked her for a drink, but that he's talking to her at all. It would have been scandalous. In fact, one ancient rabbi, said the daughters of Samaritans are perpetually in a state of religious uncleanness. In other words, they are unworthy of God and of being being part of society. And then this is what D.A. Carson says, another one of my favorite scholars. She does not know that far from being defiled by what is unclean, Jesus sanctifies what he touches. So what John wrote, literally, it was Jews do not share in common, probably meaning whatever was used to get the water, because she was to get it and then she would hand it to him. And that would have been unheard of, both in the Jewish culture and the Samaritan culture. And as a religious Jew and a rabbi, no less, he should not have been talking to this woman. It would have been truly shocking that Jesus engaged this woman in any sort of conversation, much less the theological one on which he is about to embark with this this woman of questionable character. So Jesus is breaking all kinds of taboos here, cultural taboos here. And can I just say, I'm sorry guys, but don't give me any of this gobbledygook about God being anti-woman and misogynistic and sexist. Here is God in the flesh, treating a woman that you and I would probably avoid with concern and respect. Amen. So let's talk about living water. So Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." So again, we see this idea of living water. So there's two challenges going on with this. Two questions. They're not really given. They're more implicit. Will she ask for a drink? And then will she understand the water that is being offered to her and the identity of its giver? And when he says, if you knew the gift of God, it could be eternal life, salvation. If you knew that, if you only knew that God can give you salvation, that's possible. But it also could be the Torah, because it was called God's gift to the Jews. So if you really knew your Torah and who is asking you for a drink, your response would be different. You would understand who I am. We don't know which one it is. Maybe it's something else, but those are possibilities. So the term living water literally meant spring water or moving water, like rivers and streams. And it was very scarce in Israel. And so it was so valued in this arid ancient Middle Eastern country that it was required for ritual washings. It was so important. And it also took on a metaphorical meaning, which is the way Jesus is using it. He's not talking about moving water. He's talking about water that can bring life. So he's not talking about H2O. So the woman may have been baffled because there were no rivers or streams in Shechem. So there was no living water in Shechem. She might have thought. But there was. And he was sitting right beside her. So again, we see misunderstanding in John. She keeps thinking of physical water, H2O. Jesus is talking about symbolic living water. The water spoken of by the prophets. There are Old Testament verses that show that God both is the living water and gives the living water. So Jesus is talking about himself as well as the water from the well. And it is water that cleanses and renews and restores and satisfies. So these verses find their fulfillment in Jesus, who is the source of living water and also is living water. He is the water that only God can provide. So let's talk more about what it is. So it is the new life available through the Spirit of God. It is the new life that begins now and lasts forever. It eternally quenches spiritual thirst. And it's what Jesus called being born again or born from the Spirit. It's salvation. That is the living water that only God can provide. And it is a power that can transform even the loneliest, most sinful outcast woman in Samaria. But the woman is incredulous. She can't believe her ears. Are you greater than our father Jacob? She says. And her answer is clearly no, you can't be greater than Jacob. So there's good news and bad news here. She asks for a drink, right? But she still doesn't understand what she's asking for, nor who it is that offers it. So Jesus is going to help her see by taking what seems to be a complete bolt from the blue. That's going to be problematic for me. My eyes were young when I could do this, but that's okay. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." That's part of the amusing part, right? So yeah, Jesus shows her something of who she is and what he is, as well as her need for living water in this. First, she tries what my family calls creative truth-telling. You don't tell the truth, but you don't actually lie. Let me give you an example. My mother was the queen of truth telling, like truth. What did I call it? Creative truth telling. She was the best at it. So my sister Missy, my youngest sister, was getting married, and they went to the place to get the cake where we'd gotten all 3 other sisters' cakes, Gerda's Bakery. And so they go in, they test the cakes and all that, and then they order the cake from Gerda. And then sometime later, my mother and Missy went to this is the 80s, so, or 90s, it's the 90s. So they go to this wedding, and the wedding cake is not just one wedding cake, it's a bunch of cakes that look like wedding packages. And they're like, "This is so cute." So they ask where they got it. And my mom had forgotten about Gerda, and so she didn't call Gerda. And so Gerda called her eventually for some details about the wedding. And so my mother's answer to her was something like this. And she had a very high voice, I don't. "Oh, Gerda. Oh, Gerda, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Gerda, I'm just so sorry. I just, in all the turmoil, well, we're not going to be needing a wedding cake." And it made it sound like there wasn't going to be a wedding. But what she meant was, we already have it. So this is a little bit of created truth-telling from her. I don't have a husband. But Jesus already knew. And Jesus already knew what my mom said too. But I don't think she's in trouble in heaven for it. So Jesus proceeds to shock this woman with the whole truth. And then she lets loose my favorite line in the whole story. "Sir, I can perceive that you are a prophet." Yeah, he is. He knows everything about you. I'm going to talk a little bit. Nope, I'm not. I'm going to stop right there. That was a long lecture. Thank you for hanging in there.